On Friday, the 6th of March, 1981, at 7:10 a.m., a husband waited in line at a dry cleaner on Route 46 inches Parsippany. He still had his work badge on, the plastic clip rubbing his shirt collar. The place smelled like steam and starch, the same 3 hangers squeaking on the same metal rack. A woman ahead of him paid in cash, folded her receipt twice, then slid it under the counter mat instead of into her purse. It wasn't hurried. It was neat, like a habit with a purpose. 3 Mondays later, just after 7 a.m., he saw the same motion again. Cash, receipt, fold, under the mat while the clerk looked down at the register tape like she didn't notice. He told himself he was inventing patterns to kill time. But when he got home that night, he wrote down the cleaner's address on the back of an envelope. If it happened again, he would stand close enough to see the ink. The envelope stayed on the kitchen counter beneath a stack of unopened mail. Utility bill, credit card statement, a flyer for carpet cleaning. He didn't move it when he wiped the counter after dinner. He slid around it, keeping the address visible. Their house in Clifton followed a strict evening rhythm. Dinner at 6:30, dishes by 7, television low enough to hear the clock in the hallway click between minutes. His wife moved through these hours without variation. Shoes off by the door, purse on the chair by the table, always upright. Strap tucked under. On Tuesday night, at 8:12 p.m., she emptied her purse onto the table to look for a pen. Keys, wallet, a folded receipt, creased twice. She slid it back inside before he could read the header. He said nothing. He rinsed a glass and set it upside down in the rack. When she went upstairs, he checked the clock again. Same time as the cleaner, same day of the week. At the time, he had paper and time. The address came after. He began writing dates on the inside flap of the envelope. March 6, March 29, April 5. Always weekdays, always early. He didn't label them. He didn't add notes. Just numbers, spaced evenly, like something meant to be checked later. On April 16, a Thursday, he arrived at the dry cleaner at 6:55 a.m. instead of 7 to 10. He stood closer to the counter this time, close enough to see the mat's frayed edge and the faint blue ink bleeding through the receipt paper when it slid underneath. The clerk didn't look up. The woman didn't hesitate. He paid for his shirts and left without them, claiming he'd grabbed the wrong ticket. Outside, the morning traffic moved in short bursts, stopping and starting at the light. He waited until his watch turned to 7:05 before writing the time on the envelope. At home that night, his wife placed her purse on the chair as usual. He noticed the weight of it when she set it down, the way the strap fell heavier on one side. He watched her wash her hands, dry them carefully, and check the hallway clock before sitting. Nothing was said. Nothing needed to be. He added one more date to the envelope and slid it into a drawer with old instruction manuals and spare batteries. He closed the drawer slowly, listening for the latch to catch. It didn't. Not the first time. The kitchen drawer scraped against its track when he pulled it open with 2 fingers. The batteries and manuals sat where he'd left them, and the envelope lay flat beneath a rubber band, like it had been filed for a reason. He took it out without tearing it, then sat at the table with a cheap ballpoint pen and a pocket calendar from his wallet. The paper made a dry sound when he smoothed it. He didn't write sentences. He wrote dates, then circled the weekday letter beside each one. He kept the circles the same size. In the mornings, he watched for small confirmations that didn't require him to follow anyone. The house gave him enough. His wife's purse stayed upright on the chair, strap tucked under. Her keys always landed on the right side of the table, near the salt shaker. When she left for work, she didn't look back at rooms. On Wednesday, April 22, he came home at 6:18 p.m. and found the purse already on the chair. Her shoes were set parallel by the door, toes pointed toward the hallway. He washed his hands, dried them, and then, as if it were his own habit, nudged the purse strap aside to clear a place for the mail. Inside the purse, a folded receipt sat against the lining like a stiff bookmark. He didn't unfold it. He only noted the creased 2 folds, both pressed hard, like someone had used a thumbnail. When he slid the strap back over, he did it carefully, returning the twist to the same angle. At 7:40, she entered the kitchen and went straight to the sink. She ran water, used soap, and rinsed longer than usual. She dried her hands with the same towel each time, moving the fabric to a dry corner. Then she looked at the hallway clock as if checking a rule. He had seen her do that before. Not every night. Only on certain days. He opened the pocket calendar and marked the time beside the date. He didn't label it. He didn't add her name. He wrote 7:40 and boxed it. 2 days later, a Friday, he stopped at the dry cleaner again, but he didn't go in right away. He sat in his car until he saw the minute hand on his watch cross the 12. He entered at 7:08 a.m., stood behind a man in a nylon windbreaker, and watched the counter mat like it was a register display. The same woman was there, cash, folded receipt, under the mat. He wrote 7:8 on the envelope flap when he got back to the car, then underlined it once. The underline was the first mark he'd made that wasn't a number. At home that evening, he compared the times. Morning window, 7 o'clock hour. Evening check, 7 o'clock hour. He didn't force it to match. He let the ink sit on the paper until it looked like a pattern without needing a story. Near 9 p.m., his wife's purse shifted from upright to its side, as if something inside had been removed and replaced. He noticed because the strap no longer lay tucked under. It hung off the chair edge, swinging slightly when the furnace kicked on. He picked it up by the strap and set it back upright. The motion was small, almost domestic, but it changed the way the room sounded to him. When she came downstairs at 9:17, she paused by the chair, touched the purse strap once, then walked past it without opening it. He waited until her footsteps faded down the hallway before he opened the drawer again. The latch caught this time, clean and final. The envelope came out with the manuals again, sliding against the wood as he pulled the drawer open. He carried it to the table, laid it beside his pocket calendar, and lined up the corners as if that alignment mattered. He added the newest marks in the same pen. April 22, April 24. Times boxed. Weekday letters circled. He didn't write her name anywhere, not even an initial. The page looked like a work schedule somebody was trying to keep clean. He started comparing places, not people. On Monday, April 27, he skipped Parsippany and drove to a second dry cleaner near his office in Wayne, the one with the faded alterations sign and a bell that rang when the door opened. He arrived early, but he didn't check his watch until after he'd stepped inside and taken a number from the dispenser. The paper ticket curled in his palm. When he finally looked, it was 7:12 a.m. He waited behind 2 customers and watched the counter from a distance. The mat was different rubber, not cloth, but it sat in the same position, covering the edge where hands naturally rested. No receipt went under it. No cash slid across. The clerk tore receipts from a roll and dropped them straight into open palms. He wrote, "Wayne nothing," on the envelope flap in small letters. It was the first phrase he'd allowed himself. 2 days later, Wednesday at 7:06 a.m., he returned to Parsippany. Same counter, same squeak from the hangers. He stood close enough to see the frayed corner of the mat lift when someone's knuckles brushed it. The woman appeared again, not rushing, not scanning the room. She paid cash. The receipt folded twice, under the mat. He felt his own fingers tighten around his ticket stub. He kept his shoulders still. He watched the clerk's eyes move, not to the mat, but to the register tape, like she was counting something that wasn't money. Outside, in his car, he wrote the time in block numbers, then added a second underline beneath it. The line looked heavier than the paper deserved. At home, he tested his log against the household routine the same way he tested locations. He didn't follow her anywhere. He watched the repeatable points. On Thursday, April 30, she came in at 7:39 p.m. and washed her hands longer than the night before. He timed it without a watch by listening to the faucet. Steady flow, then a quick shut-off, then another burst as if she'd decided the first rinse wasn't enough. When she dried her hands, she pulled the towel down from its hook and refolded it into a tighter rectangle before hanging it back. That was new. The kitchen towel had never been treated like a document. He waited until she went upstairs, then went to the chair and lifted her purse by the strap. The weight felt uneven again. He set it on the table and opened it just far enough to see a folded receipt pressed flat against the lining, like it had been planted there to stay. He didn't remove it. He slid a fingertip along the edge and felt a raised ridge in the paper, as if something small had been trapped inside the fold and then removed. He closed the purse and returned it to the chair, but the strap fell differently 1 inch farther toward the edge. He adjusted it back, then adjusted it again, trying to match the exact twist he'd seen before. When she came downstairs at 9:11, she went straight to the chair, touched the strap once, and stopped. Her hand stayed there, still, like she was listening through the leather. He sat at the table with the envelope in front of him and wrote 9/11 beside 4/30, then drew a box around it. He had 2 locations now, one clean and one repeating. He had times that kept landing in the same hour. What he didn't have was what the folded paper was doing under that mat, or why the house seemed to notice when he wrote it down. The bell over the dry cleaner door rang once and stopped, leaving the room to its usual hiss of steam. He took a step toward the counter and let the line form behind him instead of in front. When he checked his watch after hanging up his coat ticket, the hands sat at 7:09 a.m., close enough to his other marks to feel intentional. The counter mat was in the same place, cloth-backed, its corner curled like a fingernail. He stood near the register display, close enough to see the tiny tears where coins had scraped the surface over years. The clerk kept her shoulders square to the machine. Her eyes didn't rise above the cash drawer. The woman arrived without scanning the room. She didn't look at him, and she didn't look at the clerk, either. She placed cash down in a flat stack, bills aligned, then waited with her hands on the counter edge, fingers relaxed. The clerk printed the receipt and handed it over. The woman folded it twice, clean creases, and slid it under the mat with 2 fingers. He watched the paper disappear and caught one detail he hadn't before. The ink at the top was a dull purple-blue, not black, like a ribbon that had been used too long. He waited for his own turn. He paid with a 5 and 3 singles, money he'd taken from the same spot in his wallet. The clerk tore his receipt and held it out without meeting his eyes. He didn't take it right away. "Can you reprint that?" he asked, keeping his voice level, as if he'd lost tickets before. It wasn't a request for information. It was a request for procedure. The clerk's mouth tightened for half a second. Then she hit a key, the register chirped, and the tape advanced with a dry, reluctant sound. She handed him the second receipt. The ink looked slightly darker, still purple-blue, and he could see where the print head had pressed harder at the date line. He folded it once, then unfolded it again, pretending to check the total. The clerk's eyes shifted down to the mat and back to the tape, quick as a blink. Her hand moved to straighten the mat's edge, but she didn't lift it. Outside, he wrote the time on the envelope flap with the pen he kept in the glove compartment. He wrote 7/9 and underlined it once, then added purple in smaller letters beside it. The word looked wrong next to numbers. At home that evening, he didn't mention the cleaner. He didn't mention receipts. He ate dinner, rinsed his plate, and listened to the hallway clock click into the next minute. His wife set her purse on the chair at 7:37 p.m. and went to wash her hands. When she finished, she didn't dry them right away. She stood at the sink with water still dripping from her fingers, watching the towel like she was deciding whether to touch it. Then she took the towel down, refolded it into a tighter rectangle, and hung it back with the seam facing outward. He marked 7:37 on the envelope and drew a box around it, like the other times. The act was quiet. It didn't change anything in the room. At 9:14, he heard the chair legs shift an inch on the kitchen floor. He didn't look up immediately. He waited until the sound settled, then glanced over. His wife was standing by the chair with her hand on the purse strap. She wasn't opening it. She wasn't moving it. She was only holding the strap between her fingers, as if checking attention. He watched her for 3 seconds. Then she released it and walked out of the kitchen without washing her hands again. He waited until the hallway light went off before opening the drawer with the manuals. The envelope was where he'd left it, but the top flap was no longer sitting flat. It was lifted slightly, like someone had slid a fingertip underneath and stopped. He checked the clock above the stove after he pressed it closed. The red numbers read 9:22. He set the envelope on the table and held it down with his palm, flattening the flap as if pressure could erase a touch. The kitchen light hummed. A pot sat on the back burner from dinner, lid tilted to vent steam that wasn't there anymore. He didn't open the envelope right away. He went to the hallway closet and pulled out a shoebox of household papers, warranty cards, appliance manuals, tax stubs folded into thirds. The box smelled faintly of cardboard and old rubber bands. At 6:58 a.m., the next morning, Friday, May 1, he left early without waking her. He stopped at the Parsippany dry cleaner and stood in the same place he had stood before, near the mat's curled corner. The watch on his wrist turned to 7:10 while he waited, and he kept his eyes on the counter edge, not on faces. The woman didn't come. The clerk tore receipts and passed them over the mat without hesitation. No cash stack, no folding, nothing slid under. He paid for a shirt he didn't need cleaned and walked out with a ticket he would probably lose. He wrote 5/1 no-show on the envelope as soon as he got back to the car. He didn't underline it. That night, after dinner, he didn't check his wife's purse. He checked the papers. He sat at the table with the shoebox and began sorting by dates the way he'd started sorting by weekdays. He found their bank statement, the one with the perforated edges, and pressed it flat with a mug so it wouldn't curl back on itself. The deposits were ordinary. Paycheck. Paycheck. A small reimbursement. Then, in the middle of April, a cash deposit that didn't match the shape of the rest. Not large enough to be noticed at a glance. Not small enough to be a mistake. He ran his thumb along the line where the numbers were printed, feeling the raised ink. He wrote the deposit date on the envelope flap and circled it, the same way he circled weekdays. At 8:26 p.m., his wife came into the kitchen and opened the drawer with the manuals to get spare batteries for the television remote. He didn't stop her. He watched her hand move over the envelope without lifting it, like she knew it was there and didn't want to admit it. She took 2 AA batteries and closed the drawer. The latch caught cleanly. When she went upstairs, he opened the drawer again. The envelope's corner had shifted a fraction. Not enough to be obvious, but enough that the paper no longer lined up with the drawer's edge. He lifted it and saw a thin slip of paper stuck beneath it, the kind that tears off a receipt roll when the blade is dull. He held it under the kitchen light. There were numbers on it, tight and faint, pressed hard by pencil, short groups, separated by dots, like someone counting minutes and trying not to waste space. No names, no words, just the pressure marks and the grain of cheap paper. He didn't put it on the table. He didn't carry it around the house. He took a glass tumbler from the cabinet and placed the slip inside so it couldn't fold again. Then he set the tumbler at the back of the counter behind the dish rack, where it looked like a forgotten cup. He checked the hallway clock after he did it. 9:04. When his wife came downstairs at 9:16, she paused at the counter without touching anything. Her eyes went to the dish rack first, then to the sink, then to the back corner where the tumbler sat. She didn't reach for it. She didn't ask. She went to the sink and washed her hands anyway, longer than usual, and dried them on the towel she kept refolding. Then she left the kitchen with her hands still slightly damp, as if she didn't want to touch the doorframe. He waited until he heard the bedroom door close. Then he took the slip out of the tumbler and slid it into the shoebox between 2 bank statements, paper against paper so it wouldn't move. In the envelope, beside 5/1 no-show, he wrote one more line. He stopped there. He didn't add an underline. Not yet. The shoebox stayed under the bed for 3 days before he touched it again. He kept it there because it was inconvenient, and because inconvenience made him hesitate in a way that felt safer than choice. On Tuesday morning, he drove past the Parsippany dry cleaner without stopping. He went to work, ate lunch at his desk, and came home with his tie loosened and his hands smelling like copier paper. After dinner, he pulled the shoebox out and laid the slip of numbered paper on the table beside the folded receipts. He didn't try to decode the numbers. He only compared their shapes. The groups were too neat to be a grocery total, too evenly spaced to be a phone number. Some dots sat slightly higher than the rest, like the pencil had lifted and returned at the same angle. He placed everything into the same beige envelope he'd been marking. Receipts first, the numbered slip between two of them. The envelope flap closed with a wet line of glue from the sponge he used for stamps. Then he pressed a coffee mug on top of it for 10 minutes, as if weight could make it official. At 8:43 p.m., he wrote a new address on the front in block letters. Not Parsippany, not Clifton. A municipal building in Newark where he'd paid a parking ticket once, the kind of place with fluorescent hallways and posted hours. The next day, he took a half-hour off work and drove there. He parked in a lot that charged by the quarter hour and fed the meter until the dial clicked into place. Inside, he followed signs for records, then sat on a plastic chair beneath a bulletin board covered in curling notices. A clerk behind glass slid a form through a metal slot. The pen was chained to the counter with thin wire. He filled in his name and address because the boxes demanded it, not because he wanted to. Under reason for request, he wrote one word, personal. Then he stopped writing. When he handed over the beige envelope, the clerk didn't open it. She turned it sideways, checked the flap, and stamped the corner with a date. The stamp hit twice because the first impression was faint. She wrote a number in the margin and repeated it aloud, monotone, as if speaking made it real. He asked what happened next. She said, "Someone will contact you if they need to." It wasn't reassurance. It was a boundary. He walked out with a carbon copy of the intake slip, still warm from the printer. In the car, he checked his watch after he'd started the engine. 11:26 A. The minute mattered because it made the day measurable. Nothing happened for a week. The absence didn't feel quiet. It felt managed. He stopped at the dry cleaner once, early, and watched the countermat from the doorway. The woman didn't appear. The clerk tore receipts and passed them over the mat like the ritual had never existed. At home, his wife's routines tightened instead of loosening. The purse remained upright, but now the strap was tucked under with extra care, folded inward like a seam. When she washed her hands, she used less water and more soap, rubbing longer between fingers. She refolded the kitchen towel into a narrower rectangle and hung it higher on the hook, so it wouldn't brush the counter. On Friday night, he came downstairs at 9:08 and found the telephone receiver resting slightly off its cradle. Not enough to hang up, just enough to keep the line open. He touched it with one finger and felt the faint warmth of recent use. He set it back properly and listened for the click. His wife entered the kitchen a minute later, glanced at the phone, and went to the sink without speaking. She turned the water on, then off, then on again, as if correcting timing. The following Monday, a plain envelope arrived in the mail with no return address, only a postmark and his name typed in all caps. Inside was a single sheet asking him to call a number during business hours and reference the intake code printed on his carbon copy. He didn't call right away. He sat at the table with the paper in his hands until the hallway clock moved from 7:14 to 7:15. Then he folded the letter once and slid it into the shoebox. Upstairs, his wife opened a dresser drawer and shut it again, twice, as if checking whether something had been moved. The coffee tin in the pantry had a lid that squealed when it turned, a thin metal complaint that always made him pause. He used it anyway, twisting slowly so it wouldn't echo through the house, then set the lid back in the same place with the seam facing the wall. The note from the plain envelope stayed in his pocket for half a day before he called. He did it from a payphone outside a hardware store, not because he thought anyone was listening, but because the habit of moving a step away from home had taken hold. He fed in a dime, held the receiver tight to his ear, and read the intake code off his carbon copy. The voice on the other end was male and careful. It didn't ask him to repeat the story. It asked him to confirm dates. Was the placement under the mat consistent? The voice said. Yes, he said. Same fold, same time window. A pause, the faint sound of paper shifting. Then an instruction delivered like a schedule. Bring any originals you still had, and come to a public building lobby in Newark on Wednesday morning. No office name, no door number, a bench by a vending machine. He was told to arrive, sit, and wait until someone approached and used the intake code. He didn't argue. He wrote the time down after he hung up, because writing it down was how he kept his hands steady. At home that night, his wife set her purse on the chair and refolded the kitchen towel into its narrow rectangle. She didn't look at the hallway clock this time. She looked at him instead, briefly, then went upstairs without washing her hands again. On Wednesday, he took the day's first train into Newark and walked 3 blocks with the intake slip in his wallet. The lobby smelled of floor wax and old cigarette smoke trapped in stone. A vending machine clicked and dropped cans into a metal tray, one after another, as people came and went. He sat on the bench and kept his knees still. He checked the wall clock only after he'd settled. It read 9:08. No one approached. A man in a brown coat walked past twice. A woman in a postal uniform stopped to tie her shoe. A maintenance worker rolled a cart of trash bags across the tile, the wheels leaving black scuffs. Nobody said the code. At 9:27, he stood, walked to the vending machine, bought a coffee he didn't want, and returned to the bench. The cup warmed his palm. The clock moved. Joden Sisheryifen. A micro-turn arrived the way small things do. The lobby payphone rang once, then stopped. Nobody answered it. The receiver didn't lift. The ring had been precise, timed, like a signal that didn't need a listener. He waited until 10:12 before leaving. Outside, he stood with his back to the building and looked down the sidewalk as if he'd dropped something. He saw no familiar face. No one followed. The next morning, he drove to the Parsippany dry cleaner out of habit more than hope. He entered, took a number, and stood near the countermat's frayed corner like he belonged there. He didn't check his watch until after the bell over the door stopped ringing. It was 7:11 a.m. The clerk tore receipts and passed them straight across the mat. Cash stacks came and went. A woman paid with a check and asked about a hem. The mat stayed flat. Nothing slid under it. He waited until 7:24, long past the minute window he'd boxed so many times, then paid for a jacket he didn't need cleaned and left with the ticket in his pocket. At home that evening, his wife's purse was not on the chair. The chair sat empty, tucked in. When she came in at 7:38, she carried the purse directly upstairs without stopping in the kitchen. He opened the drawer with the manuals and found it empty of the envelope. The batteries were there. The instruction booklet was there. The space where the beige paper had been was clean, as if it had never been used. He stood with his hand on the drawer front until the hallway clock clicked into the next minute, listening for a sound upstairs that didn't come. The drawer stayed empty for days, the wood showing a pale rectangle where the envelope had protected it from light. He kept opening it anyway, as if repetition could force an object back into place. The latch caught every time now, clean and certain. He didn't ask her about it. He didn't ask because asking would turn the house into a room with only one subject, and he still had to eat breakfast there. He still had to leave for work and come home and stand in front of the refrigerator with its weak bulb and decide what could be made from what was left. A week after the Newark lobby, he rode the same train again, sat on the same bench by the vending machine, and watched the same wall clock with its minute hand that jumped slightly at each mark. He waited until the second hand made 2 full loops past 9 and then another half hour beyond that. Nobody used the intake code. The payphone didn't ring. He walked out at 10:18 and kept his eyes on reflections in the glass doors, not on faces. He saw only people moving the way people move when they have errands to finish. At home, the kitchen towel stopped being refolded. It hung loose, damp at the edge. That change should have felt like relief, but it only meant the ritual had been withdrawn. His wife's purse stayed upstairs now. When she came in after work, she went straight to the bedroom, shut the door, and returned with empty hands. By the middle of June, 1981, the Parsippany dry cleaner had changed the countermat. The frayed corner was gone, replaced with a thicker black rubber pad that sat flat and didn't curl. He noticed it because his eyes had been trained to. The clerk worked the same keys. The hanger rack squeaked in the same rhythm. The place looked unchanged to anyone else. He went 3 times anyway. Each time he entered, he waited to check his watch until he had taken a number and touched the counter edge with his fingertips, as if that contact mattered. The time stayed near the old window, 7, 6, 7 to 13, 7, 9, but the folded receipts never returned. Cash came and went like normal cash. People signed checks. Someone argued about a stain. The mat stayed flat. In August, he received another plain envelope with no return address. This one held only a short typed line. No further action required. There was no signature, no phone number, no agency name, no instruction to destroy anything. The paper felt lighter than the first note, as if it had been cut from a larger sheet and separated without care. He put it in the shoebox under the bed, but the shoebox no longer held proof. It held shapes, his handwriting, the carbon copy, a few old receipts he had never dared to keep in the same place. The numbered slip was gone. The beige envelope was gone. The pattern, once written down, had been erased from the house as if it were a stain that could be lifted. He watched his wife for changes that could be counted. She stopped carrying cash for a while. She started bringing home groceries on Wednesdays instead of Tuesdays. Once, at 9:22 p.m., she stood by the mailbox in the dark with her hand on the lid and then walked back inside without opening it. He didn't follow her. He didn't stop her. He wrote the time down on a scrap of paper and then, after a long minute, threw it away. Years later, the dry cleaner on Route 46 was still there, under a new sign and new ownership, the same steam smell rising from the back. He went in once on a cold morning, just to see if the counter felt the same under his fingertips. The mat didn't move. The receipts lay where receipts belonged. The woman never appeared again, and neither did anyone who used his intake code. He left with a ticket in his pocket and a sense of being handled at a distance like the case had ended somewhere else, without ever needing him to be told.